The first time my basement flooded, I honestly thought a pipe had burst. I came downstairs in my socks at 6 in the morning, half asleep, coffee still brewing upstairs, and stepped straight into freezing water, 3 inches deep, creeping across the concrete floor like it belonged there. My furnace was dead, cardboard boxes were melting into the floor, and 30 years of family photos were floating around like little paper boats. And the crazy part is, my house had never flooded before. Not once. Not in 38 years. Not through hurricanes. Not through those Tennessee spring storms that sound like God dragging furniture across the sky. Nothing. Then my new neighbors moved in, and suddenly my basement turned into a damn swimming pool. Their names were Ethan and Claire Holloway. They bought the property at the top of the hill the previous fall, a massive white brick estate sitting on 6 acres overlooking the neighborhood like it owned the zip code. Everybody talked about them when they arrived because people like that don't quietly move into small towns. Ethan was some private equity guy out of Nashville. Claire had one of those lifestyle Instagram accounts where every photo looks accidentally expensive, and within 2 weeks of moving in, they had contractors crawling all over that property from sunrise to dark. Huge landscaping crews, dump trucks, stone masons, surveyors. I remember standing in my driveway one evening watching excavators tear up the side of their yard while my next-door neighbor Walt walked over holding a beer and said, "You know what rich people hate more than taxes? Natural land." I laughed at the time. Turns out Walt was a prophet. Because before the Holloways bought that house, rainwater used to flow naturally down the hill through these shallow channels hidden between tree lines and old drainage paths that had probably existed longer than any of us. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. Then Claire decided she wanted the property to look cleaner. That was her word. Cleaner. She hated the little runoff channels because they interrupted the symmetry of the lawn in drone photos. So the landscapers regrade the entire hill. They built limestone terraces, retaining walls, imported Kentucky bluegrass, even installed these soft amber lights along the pathways that made the place glow at night like a luxury resort. It looked incredible, right up until the first hard rain. I still remember hearing it that night. Rain hammering the windows around 2 in the morning, thunder shaking the walls, the kind of storm where you just roll over and think, well, there goes somebody's patio furniture. I had no idea somebody was me. Around 6, I headed downstairs because I heard this weird humming sound, almost electrical, and that's when I stepped into the water. For a second, my brain genuinely couldn't process what I was seeing. The basement smelled like wet insulation and mud. My water heater was half submerged. The old oak cabinet where my late wife kept photo albums had tipped over sideways, pictures spilling everywhere. There was this one photograph of her holding our daughter at Disneyland in 1998, both of them soaked and stuck to the floor drain. And I don't know. Man, something about that image just broke me for a minute. Because it wasn't just water damage anymore. It felt personal. By noon, I'd already spent $4 grand calling emergency restoration crews, replacing equipment, ripping out carpet, hauling ruined boxes into the driveway. And while all that was happening, I noticed something strange outside. Water was still pouring down the hill from the Holloways property in steady streams, cutting straight across my backyard toward the foundation vents. It looked deliberate, like somebody had aimed the entire hillside directly at my house. So I walked up there. I wasn't angry yet, honestly, just confused. Claire was outside with a landscaper holding one of those giant Stanley cups, completely calm, while workers spread fresh mulch like there wasn't a flood happening 50 yards downhill. I said, "Hey, I think something from the grading project redirected runoff into my yard. My basement flooded pretty bad last night." She barely looked at me, just took a sip and said, "Well, water flows downhill." I actually stood there waiting for the rest of the sentence. An apology, concern, literally anything human. But that was it. Then she added, "That's kind of nature's thing." And I swear to God, something shifted in me right there. Because some people make mistakes and try to fix them. But other people, especially rich people who've spent too long getting away with things, they treat damage like it's only real if it happens to them. And standing there watching her designer rain boots sink in a mud her workers created, I had this feeling deep in my gut that this situation was about to get a whole lot uglier. For the next couple weeks, I tried really hard to handle things like an adult. That probably sounds ridiculous considering where this story ends up, but it's true. I wasn't looking for revenge. I wasn't trying to sue anybody. I just wanted my basement dry again and maybe a little acknowledgement that what happened to my house mattered. Instead, every conversation with the Holloways somehow made me feel crazier. Ethan finally came by one afternoon wearing loafers that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, looked around the basement for maybe 30 seconds, and said, "These older homes usually have drainage vulnerabilities." Vulnerabilities. Like my house was some defective product instead of the place where I raised my daughter. I told him the basement had never flooded before they reworked the hill. He shrugged and said, "Correlation doesn't equal causation." Then he handed me the business card for a waterproofing company and left. That was the moment I stopped trying to be polite. See, people assume neighborhood disputes explode because of one dramatic incident, but honestly, they usually rot slowly. It's little things. Tone. Smirks. The feeling that somebody with more money has already decided your problems are beneath them. And the Holloways had this way of talking to everyone around them like they were temporary employees. A few days later, I was outside dragging ruined drywall to the curb when Walt wandered over again, carrying another beer. He looked up the hill and said, "You know they fired the first contractor because he warned them the grading would push runoff downhill." I stopped cold. "What?" He nodded. Apparently, his nephew worked for the excavation company during the first week of the project. According to him, the original foreman told Claire the drainage channels existed for a reason, and removing them could create flooding issues below the property line. 2 days later, that contractor disappeared, and a new crew took over. Now suddenly my stomach wasn't just angry anymore. It was suspicious. So I started digging. Literally at first. I walked the property line after the next rainstorm and found fresh trenches hidden beneath decorative rock beds, all angled toward my side yard. Then I went down to the county permitting office. Tiny little building near downtown, smelled like old paper and burnt coffee. The clerk typed in the Holloway's address, frowned at her monitor, then looked up at me and said, "That's odd." Turns out they had permits for retaining walls and exterior lighting, but nothing for major drainage modification or regrading. In our county, if you alter natural stormwater flow, you're supposed to submit engineering plans because redirecting runoff onto neighboring properties is illegal as hell. I asked the clerk what happens if somebody skips that process. She leaned back in her chair and said, "Usually? Eventually they meet Carl." Carl turned out to be the county stormwater inspector, a 60-something former Marine with sunburned skin and absolutely no patience for wealthy homeowners. He came out 2 days later wearing muddy boots and carrying this yellow legal pad folded in half. Didn't say much at first. Just walked the hill slowly while rainwater still pooled in certain areas from the previous storm. Every few minutes he'd stop, kneel down, scratch notes onto the pad, then keep moving. Claire came outside halfway through the inspection wearing oversized sunglasses even though it was cloudy. "What exactly is this about?" she asked. Carl didn't even look up. "Gravity," he said. I liked Carl immediately. About an hour later, he knocked on my front door and asked if I wanted the good news or the expensive news. I said hopefully they were the same thing. They were not. His report confirmed the entire hillside had been reshaped specifically to move water away from the Holloway's foundation and toward neighboring lots, mainly mine. The original natural drainage channels had been blocked with fill dirt and decorative stone. "This isn't accidental runoff anymore," Carl told me. "This is engineered discharge." I remember that phrase because it sounded so absurdly official for something that basically meant your rich neighbors flooded your basement on purpose. The county issued a formal violation notice within the week. That's when things really escalated. Ethan lost his mind. He came storming down my driveway, waving paperwork around, yelling that I'd gone behind his back. I said, "You flooded my house." He snapped back, "You turned this into a legal issue." And that right there tells you everything about people like him. In his mind, the problem wasn't the damage. The problem was somebody smaller than him refusing to quietly absorb it. The county ordered them to install a proper drainage system immediately. An engineer proposed a pretty straightforward fix too, around 15 grand for a French drain system that would capture runoff and redirect it safely toward the municipal storm line. Honestly, if they'd just done it right then, this whole story probably ends there. But Ethan refused. Said the county was overreaching. Said my flooding was an unfortunate coincidence. Claire started making passive-aggressive comments online about jealous neighbors targeting successful people. One post showed her standing beside their new garden with the caption, Some people see beauty and immediately want to destroy it. That one got under my skin more than it should have. Maybe because while she was posting inspirational quotes about negativity, I was throwing away mold-covered boxes filled with my dead wife's handwriting. So yeah, I hired an attorney. Her name was Dana Mercer, and she had this terrifyingly calm energy that makes you realize somebody's about to lose a lot of money. During our first meeting, she listened to the whole story without interrupting, then asked one question. Do you want compensation or accountability? I said, what's the difference? She smiled a little and said, compensation is a check. Accountability changes their life. Man, I should have realized right there where this was headed. Once Dana subpoenaed the landscaping plans, things got ugly fast. Internal emails showed the contractors warning the Holloways multiple times about downhill runoff risks. One engineer literally wrote, current grading plan may increase hydrostatic pressure on adjacent structures. Ethan replied, prioritize aesthetics. We'll address drainage complaints if they happen. If they happen, like my house was some acceptable casualty in the pursuit of prettier drone footage. Depositions were brutal. Claire spent 4 hours insisting she didn't understand technical terminology, right up until Dana produced mood boards from her Pinterest account labeled European Slope Garden Concepts. Suddenly she knew a lot about grading. Ethan was worse. Cocky at first, dismissive, acting like the whole lawsuit was beneath him. Then Dana showed him side-by-side elevation surveys proving runoff volume onto my property had increased almost 400% after construction. I watched his expression physically change. That's the thing about evidence. Rich people hate it because money can argue with opinions, but numbers don't care who you are. The trial itself lasted 3 days. By then the whole neighborhood was following it like a Netflix series. Walt actually brought snacks to the courthouse. My engineer testified that my foundation was structurally sound and showed moisture records proving the flooding only began after the regrading project. Then the Holloways attorney tried arguing that extreme weather caused the damage. Dana stood up and calmly said, then why did every neighboring basement remain dry except the one directly below your client's artificial runoff channel? Dead silence. Even the judge leaned back at that one. And when the ruling finally came down, it hit the Holloways like a truck. The judge ordered them to install a compliant drainage system within 60 days and pay me $12,000 in damages. I remember Ethan's face going completely pale, while Claire just stared straight ahead like if she didn't blink none of it would be real. But honestly, that should have been the end of it. Instead, they appealed. And while the appeal dragged on for months, storm season came back around, which meant the hill above my house was still sitting there, waiting. The second flood was worse. Way worse. And somehow that almost made it easier emotionally. Because after the first one I still had this tiny stupid part of me, hoping maybe everybody would come to their senses and fix the problem before things got uglier. But when I walked downstairs during another storm that spring and saw 4 inches of brown water rolling across the basement floor again, I realized we were way past misunderstanding. This had become a war between pride and accountability, and pride was winning. I just stood there in the dark listening to the sump alarm scream, while water pushed through the floor drain like a fountain. At one point I actually started laughing. Not happy laughing either. The kind where your brain gets overwhelmed and decides hysteria is more useful than sadness. Because what else do you do when the same people who caused the disaster are still fighting harder to avoid responsibility than they ever fought to prevent the damage in the first place? By then the whole neighborhood had picked sides. Some people thought I should have accepted a settlement and moved on. Others thought the Holloways were getting exactly what they deserved. Claire stopped attending HOA meetings because nobody would talk to her anymore except this one retired dentist who always smelled like cigars and litigation. Ethan looked like he hadn't slept in months. Every time I saw him outside, he was pacing around the yard on speakerphone with attorneys and contractors while chunks of his luxury landscaping slowly eroded downhill into my backyard during storms. The appeal hearing came and went fast. The appellate court upheld the original ruling almost immediately, then added another $6,000 for the second flood damage. 18 grand total now, plus mandatory drainage correction. Dana called me afterward and said, "Congratulations, your neighbors are officially trapped." She was right, because once construction finally started, everything completely spiraled out of control for them. At first the contractors thought they could install a standard French drain and be done in a couple weeks. Then they started digging. That's when they discovered the water table under the Holloways property sat much higher than anyone originally estimated, meaning all that runoff pressure building beneath the hill couldn't be solved with one simple trench anymore. Suddenly, engineers were redesigning the entire system in real time. Massive perforated pipes, underground gravel beds, collection basins, commercial pumps, concrete diversion chambers. It looked less like landscaping and more like NASA preparing for launch. I remember standing outside one morning watching excavators tear apart Claire's prized garden while she sat in her SUV, crying behind sunglasses. And look, I'm not going to pretend I felt nothing seeing that. There was definitely a little satisfaction there. Maybe more than a little. But there was also this weird sadness too, because none of this had needed to happen. One decent conversation at the beginning could have prevented all of it. Instead, everybody got dragged into this insane ego contest that consumed almost 2 years of our lives. The original $15,000 fix ballooned to nearly 40 grand almost overnight. Then the city got involved. Apparently, the volume of redirected water entering the public storm system required upgrades to the municipal connection itself. Bigger pipe, control valve, new street tie-in, another $22,000. Ethan nearly exploded when he heard that number. At one point, he actually offered me $30,000 cash to drop enforcement and handle drainage myself. Dana didn't even let me answer before saying, absolutely not. Honestly, by then it wasn't about money anymore. It was about finishing what they started. The judge felt the same way too. When the Holloways tried returning to court claiming the revised drainage costs were unreasonable, the judge shut them down in under 5 minutes. I'll never forget what he said. He looked directly at Ethan and went, Mr. Holloway, expensive consequences do not erase responsibility. You created the condition. You will correct the condition. Man, you could feel the air leave Ethan's body after that sentence. And after that, the fight just disappeared from him. Construction crews spent almost 4 months ripping apart the property. The gorgeous terraced lawn Claire had bragged about online got carved into trenches and utility corridors. Decorative hedges vanished. Stone pathways were demolished. Green access vaults and inspection ports ended up scattered across the yard, like little plastic tombstones marking the grave of rich people arrogance. Their $120,000 landscaping project was basically erased. The final numbers were insane when everything settled. $89,500 for the drainage system alone. $18,000 paid to me for damages. Around 45 grand in legal fees according to neighborhood gossip, probably more honestly. Another 25,000 trying to salvage what was left of the yard afterward. And the real killer? Their property value dropped almost $250,000 because nobody shopping for multi-million-dollar homes wants a backyard that looks like a municipal flood control project. Meanwhile, my basement has stayed completely dry ever since. Bone dry. Not a single issue. Which pretty much confirmed what everybody already knew from the beginning. The flooding was never nature. It was entitlement with a landscaping budget. The strange part is, I still think about Ethan sometimes. Toward the end, he looked exhausted in a way that went beyond money. Like somewhere along the line, he realized he wasn't really fighting me anymore. He was fighting the consequences of every arrogant decision that came before. Last time I saw him, he was standing alone in that wrecked backyard staring at one of the drainage access covers while workers packed up equipment nearby. He looked over at me for a second like he wanted to say something. Maybe apologize, maybe blame me one last time, I don't know. But he never did. He just nodded once and walked back inside. And honestly, sometimes I wonder if I should have taken the 30 grand and moved on. Maybe everybody would have suffered less. Or maybe letting people buy their way out of damage is exactly why people like that keep doing whatever they want in the first place. I still go back and forth on it. So tell me what you think. If you were in my position, would you have settled early and let it go? Or would you have pushed all the way to the end like I did? And more importantly, when somebody's money and status start affecting the people around them, where do you think accountability should actually begin? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because I guarantee this neighborhood still argues about it to this day.